Barstool Sports was founded in 2003 as a New England-centered print magazine offering fantasy sports predictions and gambling advice. Over the last 16 years, the sports blog has expanded into all things pop culture and now reaches over 66 million monthly unique users. They've also become a podcast powerhouse, and Barstool is home to Pardon My Take, the #1 most downloaded sports podcast in the world, and also Call Her Daddy, the #1 female podcast. Joining us now to discuss is Barstool CEO Erica Nardini. Erica, great to have you here with us today.
Thank you for having me. Thanks.
So you've been with Barstool about 3 years now.
Yeah.
Under your watch, Barstool has become the #6 podcast publisher in the U.S. in a crowded podcast space. To what do you attribute that success?
Oh, I think podcasting is exploding. I think most forms of movie, TV, any really type of IP is going to come out of podcasts. We're deeply invested. We like it because it's a storytelling medium. It's free form. It's created. It can be distributed at any time. It's not linear, so it's very much a new medium. There's a low barrier of entry, and we think that we've done a great job of finding great talent to host really interesting programming that resonates.
Yeah, I mean, to your point, the fact that it is such a low cost entry at this point.
Completely.
How do you keep up your quality and maintain, right, the success that you've had so far?
You know, we're really discerning in terms of who comes on our platform and the type of shows and programming we create. We have, you know, in the 20 to 30 range of number of podcasts at all times. So we're always looking for new podcasts, and we're always kind of exiting podcasts that aren't working. But what we're really interested in is to continuing to grow those podcasts. Clearly something's working. We have the #1 hockey podcast, the #1 sports podcast, the #1 female podcast, fastest growing golf podcast. So we're starting to really look at sports and entertainment and culture and how we can cover those in a way that's very fresh and unique, and in a way that ultimately is beneficial to the listener and also from a business perspective for Barstool.
That idea of stopping a podcast if it's not resonating, if it's
Yeah.
not doing well, are you to that extent willing to take risks and try out different things because you are willing to pull it off if it's not working?
Yeah, for sure. We're very different than you would think about traditional media, right? You see most podcasts coming from digitally native companies versus traditional media companies. And the reason is, from an economic perspective, I think the future is very bright for podcasts, but they don't compete with linear television in terms of revenue. The second is you can be highly experimental if you have a platform that's designed for that. I think it's very difficult to be experimental if your platform isn't experimental in nature.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that, to your point, right, being selective in what you do is really important. Barstool also responsible for the catchphrase, "Saturdays are for the boys." It's everywhere, social media. It has a very, I feel like, heavily associated, the brand anyway, with the common sort of man, being that you are a woman, a female CEO. Yep. How has that shaped your perspective, and how do you shape the perspective of this brand for the common man?
So, you know, when Dave Portnoy started Barstool Sports, it was by the common man for the common man. And it was really a fan-first blog, a newspaper that turned into a blog. He wrote about things the way an average guy thought about them. It was as though he was talking to his friends at a bar, and he just happened to put that into a newspaper and then into a blog. I love that common fan-first approach. I don't think it necessarily matters if you're a man or a woman, but I think it is dramatically different than what you're seeing in media right now, because ultimately we're on the same level as our fans, and that's what makes us resonate more, and that's what makes our content more impactful, and ultimately that's what makes our business, you know, I think exceptionally more interesting.
Mm-hmm. And as we mentioned off the top, one of the podcasts that you have is Call Her Daddy. Mm-hmm. There's kind of a cult following amongst women, especially for that. Are you trying to come up with more content that is geared towards and catered towards women, or is it more of an organic, oh, this is a cool concept, we want to test this regardless of who the demo is?
We want very funny people who have a lot to say and who are authentic to who they are. If you look at, you know, we started on TikTok 2 months ago. We're the fastest growing brand on TikTok, and our audience is nearly all female. It's very similar to the content we have on Instagram. That audience is male. So we really care about the creator. We really care about the concept. And then ideally, funny is funny. Sometimes certain comedy resonates with more people than others. But ultimately, we're looking for people who we think really meet the mark, and I think it's showing in our performance.
How do you not overlap on content, let's say, right? It could be the same big story in sports, but you do have different podcasts. So how do you divide really the strategy there?
You know, I think when you have a brand that's about point of view, it's very hard to overlap because everyone has an opinion. So we may cover the same topic, we may have the same guest on multiple podcasts, but what Spit and Chicklets is going to ask versus what Pardon My Take is going to talk about versus KFC Radio, those are three different sets of people, three different audiences, three very different points of view. And so that's really what we think keeps things fresh, which is why we care about people who have something to say, because ultimately that's the least commoditized product.
So it was also recently announced on social media that you guys will be moving some content to Telegram, an encrypted app, for those who don't know, to avoid censorship from companies like Instagram. Walk us through the decision behind that. Why are you moving some stuff to
Great
Telegram?
question. So, I think Facebook, if you talk to anyone who creates content for Facebook or Instagram, their standards and community guidelines are constantly changing. And that's probably a very good and important thing for their business. We also want to stay true to our brand, the perspective we bring, the humor we have, the content we feature. And there are times where those two things are at odds. A good example is, Instagram and Facebook is concerned about videos where someone may potentially hurt themselves. If you look at a concert setting, Oktoberfest, a college tailgate, a college sporting event, people are very likely to hurt themselves. So that's content that may not make sense on their platform. It's still content that we would cover. And so we're choosing to cover that on platforms where there's a different perspective in terms of the community guidelines. We want to abide by those. We also want to stay true to ourselves.
There was a recent analysis by Vice News where 150 public-facing channels that they had found likely constitute, really extreme, kind of far right. And then if you look at sort of what's happening in Hong Kong, a lot of activists have been also coordinating through Telegram. What do you think the role is of these platforms? I mean, given, yes, there are now so many different platforms for you to distribute on, but ultimately, as the publisher here, what do you think their role should be when it comes to content?
I think platforms should be platforms, and they shouldn't be governing necessarily the content on them, so long as that content doesn't violate their terms of use. So there are all sorts of people who use Telegram. I have a text chat on Telegram. It has nothing to do with politics. It has nothing to do with the NBA. It has nothing to do with the geopolitical situation or humor from Barstool Sports. What we want to do is to make sure that we're on every platform that our audience is on. And what we're seeing, if you look at the rise of TikTok and if you look at Telegram, what you're finding is 18 to 34-year-old audiences are becoming platform agnostic, where they want the content they want the experiences they want, and they'll use multiple platforms until they find the right home.
Awesome stuff. Great to chat with you as always.
Well,
Erica,
thank you for having
so much.
me.
Erica Nardini is the CEO at Barstool. Thanks again.
Thanks again.